The Gillard government still seems to have no idea how to rebuild the border protection plan shattered by last week's High Court ruling. But in a sign it's still determined to process boat people offshore, today it briefed the opposition leader on its options. There's no indication Labor's leadership is about to accept calls from within its own ranks and the Greens for all asylum claims to be heard in Australia. Bob Brown leads the Greens and I spoke with him earlier. Bob Brown, welcome.
Thanks, Chris.
If the government moves to onshore processing, as you suggest, won't that be an invitation for people smugglers to send more boats?
Well, we're talking about asylum seekers here primarily. I know the people smugglers appellations used by both Julia Gillard and Tony Abbott, but we are dealing with asylum seekers. The people smugglers need part of the original agreement needs to be clamping down on the people smugglers, but it's dealing with the asylum seekers who are in 15 million of them are currently around the world. We've had 2,000 come by boat to Australia in the first half of this year. And the question about the future is one that we are always going to have to deal with. But 53% of Australians in the latest Nielsen poll, latest poll on this issue, a 2-to-1 majority believe that we should be taking asylum seekers ashore on mainland Australia and processing them.
How many of the 15 million would you take, and how many do you think would come if it was entirely onshore processing? Because the department thinks that we'd see more than 600 a month if that was the case. Do you think that's a reasonable number?
Well, Chris, I can give you an exact figure. The Greens think that the intake of asylum seekers should be increased from 14,000 to 20,000.
And are you happy for people smugglers to fill that?
That's still a tiny fraction of the total number of migrants coming to Australia. Whatever the figure is, the people smugglers know it's 14,000. They know that it's 20,000 for us. But you're really taking up there the Murdoch press, the Gillard, the Abbott concentration on people smugglers. But the questions really should be about the asylum seekers. And what we Greens are saying is that bringing asylum seekers ashore in Australia is cheaper for taxpayers, it's humane, and we now know from the High Court it's also legal. The other options are not.
But if you encourage people to make that journey, what's humane about people dying along the way? Aren't you encouraging people to make a very dangerous journey? And we know from history that what people will do is to make that journey if you provide them with an incentive to do so.
No, we're not encouraging them at all. We're simply setting a policy for Australia according to the majority of Australians, which is where the Greens are in accord. The big parties are out of sync with them.
Sorry, Bob Brown, at the last election, the big parties got 80% of the vote, you got 12% of the vote, and both of them went with offshore processing. So the last vote that we had was clearly in favour of offshore processing.
Oh, well, Chris, your narrow view that elections are only run on asylum seeker policy is one that I reject. But of course, elections are run on a wide range of issues. But one of those issues that has led to increases in the Greens poll is our asylum seeker policy, which most Australians would prefer over those of Labor or the coalitions.
Yes, certainly, though. I'm just trying to ascertain how many people you'd be happy to come by what we call irregular means. And so if you provide an incentive, is there an upper limit on the number of people that you think would be a reasonable number to come that way?
Well, I think I've just answered that. We think there should be a total of 20,000 to accommodate, hopefully, more processed asylum seekers coming from our north, so that we did give some hope to people who are in the camps to the north that if they wait there with greater regional discussion, they will be able to get a better chance of being resettled here in Australia. Remembering, Chris, that the so-called Pacific Island solution didn't work in the way in which you're indicating, because it was found that the asylum seekers simply bounced off Manus Island or Nauru and did end up in Australia.
Certainly, but the boat stopped. In 5 years, 288 people came by boat before the 2007 election. After that, 11,600 with a softening of the program. So clearly what you're proposing means we'll have more people coming that way. And the question is, do we have an orderly process or do we have a disorderly one?
I think we should have an orderly one, and I think we should make room for more processed asylum seekers, as I've said, and I think we should take the option, which is cheaper for taxpayers. They're facing a bill of $3 billion for the offshore solution in the coming 4 years, according to our budget estimates, it's much cheaper to have people processed in Australia. And of course, we know that they will become good, productive Australian citizens. That's the history of migration and accepting asylum seekers into this great country of ours.
And isn't part of the history of accepting people into this country and great levels of immigration that we have an orderly process, and isn't that what Australians want to see, and isn't that what they fear we're not getting when they see irregular boats?
Well, I think again, I get back to the majority of Australians. This hasn't run big on the ABC, but it's a fact. The majority of Australians think that people should be processed here in Australia. And I've got no doubt that that majority is further reflected in advertisements in tomorrow's newspapers, where 200 major community and minor community groups across Australia are calling on the big parties to take the same tack as the Greens, which is to accept asylum seekers, process them onshore and have them integrated into the Australian community as we've done traditionally. What would have happened had Malcolm Fraser said, turn around the boats, as Tony Abbott's saying, when we had the influx of Vietnamese boat people back in the 70s? They've become a terrific component of Australian society.
Most of those people were processed in camps in Hong Kong, Bob Brown.
Well, some of them were, some of them weren't. And there were tragic events at sea, and we want to stop that as best we can. But there wasn't the same sort of nasty invective by the minority that we see in Australia in 2011. And by the minority, I mean the expression of minority viewpoint in Australia. And I repeat, because this hasn't got out, but it is important to emphasise, the majority of Australians want to see the Greens alternative taken up, the alternative of processing people ashore here in this country, as Italy does, as America does, as Britain does, as all the rest of the world does.
Bob Brown, thank you.
Thank you.